This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Thousands of people across the world took part in demonstrations condemning the Israeli war on Lebanon. India, Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Amman were centers of protests which called for an end to this war.
Many streets of capital cities across the world have witnessed angry protests against Israel's actions in Lebanon. In New Delhi, Israel was described as terrorist, which is similar to what Hezbollah has been described there. The Islamic group in India called on New Delhi to break off relations with Israel.
Israel does not have the right to kill United Nations observers. We condemn this action, and we call on our government to cut off its ties with Israel.
Another demonstration took place in the streets of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. In the city of Sothern, the Iraqi position was clear. Iraqis described the United States and Israel as one nation. They prayed for Israel's defeat. The head of the al-Sadr party in Iraq, Muqtada al-Sadr, said that he will not remain silent to this Israeli aggression.
For the sake of Lebanon, we will support and stand by the Lebanese people. We will support Lebanon during good and bad times. God willing, we will not remain silent to these Israeli aggressions.
In Tehran, demonstrators raised and waved Hezbollah's flags and burnt the Israeli flags and the flags of the Great Satan, as Iranians refer to the United States of America. Protesters demanded that Israel should be punished for its actions. In the Syrian capital, where Damascus and Tehran are accused of supporting Hezbollah, protesters wore black clothing as a sign of sadness and mourning for the children of Qana. Protesters held pro-Hezbollah banners and slogans, and they pledged loyalty to Hassan Nasrallah. As was the case in Damascus, demonstrators in Amman demanded of their government to kick out the Israeli ambassador. It was an obvious show of solidarity across many capitals in the world. There has also been a shift in many Arab official positions. Several Saudi government officials called for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. Moreover, hundreds of Saudi women sent a declaration to world leaders, calling for an immediate end to the war on Lebanon and Palestine. The Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak, described the Israeli operation in Qana as ugly. Libya announced that it will do everything in its capacity to support the Lebanese steadfastness, and it will open an airlift to send assistance to Lebanon. Meanwhile, massive demonstrations took place in various cities in Egypt. Many Egyptians and politicians took to the streets, protesting the war on Lebanon. Angry demonstrators protested and chanted for long hours. Some even lost their voices in the process. On the second day after the Qana massacre, an anti-Israeli sentiment in Egypt was evident in these protests, a sentiment that had not been seen since the signing of the first Arab Accord with Israel by Sadat some 30 years ago. By looking at this angry crowd, it is hard to believe that a peace agreement exists between Israel and Egypt.
If our sons, children, women's blood is allowed to be shed, the American citizen and the Zionist citizen's blood must also be allowed to be shed anywhere.
From the eastern city of Beni Suef to the port city of Tanta, angry demonstrators took to the streets, accusing the United States of planning and supporting the Israeli aggression and providing political cover for Israel. In doing so, the United States humiliated and stripped the United Nations of its will. Therefore, the UN shares part of the blame for the Israeli aggression. Several Egyptian movie stars took part in a demonstration in front of UN headquarters in Cairo.
Give a message to the UN Secretary General. He failed to stop Israel from hitting civilians. Israel agreed to a 48-hour ceasefire. However, it attacked civilians while they were out on the streets. Tell the Secretary General to apologize, resign, and take an honorable position.
Protesters did not only express animosity towards the Israel and US-led international community, but they also expressed resentment towards the Arab regimes. Arab governments failed to take necessary measures to provide security and protection for their people, sovereignty, and land. Protesters warned Arab regimes from offering concessions at the expense of the resistance and the sacrifices of the martyrs.
We do not want this to happen. We do not want accomplishments of the resistance and Hezbollah to be wasted at the bargaining tables with the United States and Israel.
The huge anger of the Arab people at their governments, which may exceed their anger at Israel, is not only a renewal of their anti-Israeli sentiment and a renewal of their solidarity with the Lebanese people, but it is also a sign that they do not share the same position as their leaders. Many Arabs describe their regime's positions as disgraceful, and they want to apologize to every Lebanese and Palestinian for such a stand. Hussein Abad Aghani, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Good evening. The IDF stepped up its ground operations in Lebanon today with bitter clashes in the village of Ait al-Shab, close to the border. Israeli troops are in a race against time to complete the operation before diplomatic negotiations bring the offensive to a halt. IBA's Eli Wohlgelanter has that story.
On day 21 of the war, an intense exchange of fire took place between IDF forces and Hezbollah in the eastern region of southern Lebanon. Following last night's security cabinet meeting, 5 divisions comprising thousands of soldiers from the Golani, Nahal, and paratroopers infantry brigades are now deployed deep in the central and western fronts across southern Lebanon. This is the largest force that has operated in the area since the war began. The forces entered the region last night to carry out searches for Hezbollah infrastructure and weapons. Sources say the terrorists have been hiding in villages to avoid contact with the troops and are firing anti-tank missiles and rockets at IDF forces from a distance. IDF officers say the damage sustained so far by Hezbollah is far greater than originally estimated, and that many of their organization's senior commanders have been killed or wounded, including 20 over the last 2 days. Nevertheless, Hezbollah is still believed to be holding about 9,000 Katyusha rockets in its arsenal. Meanwhile, Israeli warplanes struck deep inside Lebanon today, firing at least 5 air-to-surface missiles in the Bekaa Valley, 120 kilometers north of the Israeli border in eastern Lebanon. Another strike targeted an area near the Syrian border. Warplanes also hit Hezbollah terrorists battling with soldiers near the Lebanese border as the gunmen fired mortars into Israel. So far, no additional reserve soldiers recently called up have entered Lebanon, although their deployment is being considered. Eli Wohlgelanter, IBA News.
Today's expanded ground operation in Lebanon comes in the wake of a late-night decision by the Inner Security Cabinet. Following nearly 4 hours of discussion, the ministers overwhelmingly approved the stepped-up operations. Only Shas Minister Eli Yishai abstained in the vote. Ministers at the meeting said the aim of the expanded IDF actions would be to remove all rocket launches south of the Litani River.
It's the only decision that they can take, because it's obvious that we need to clean the whole area in South Lebanon from the capability of Hezbollah to launch rockets against Israel. My division did it 20 years ago in 3 hours. It will take more than that, because it's different, but at the end we must push the Hezbollah behind the Litani.
The inner cabinet decision came just hours after Prime Minister Ehud Olmert spoke out publicly for the first time since the Qana bombings. In a hard-hitting speech to local council leaders, Olmert said there is no ceasefire and there will not be one in the next few days until the terrorist threat to the northern communities is lifted and the kidnapped IDF soldiers return home safely. The Prime Minister stressed there are still difficult days in store for Israel before this campaign is over. The importance of last night's Inner Security Cabinet decision is that it allows the IDF to prepare the ground in South Lebanon for the arrival of a multinational force. This according to Defense Minister Amir Peretz, who met with IDF soldiers today just before they went into battle across the border. Peretz added that Israel is watching Syria closely and will target every vehicle carrying weapons from that country into Lebanon. However, he said Israel is not trying to provoke a war with Syria. Meanwhile, families of the 3 kidnapped IDF soldiers continue to appeal to foreign governments for help in getting their loved ones released. The wife and father of Ehud Goldwasser, who was captured by Hezbollah terrorists, along with Eldad Regev on July 12th, are in Britain today to speak with officials there. Kalanit, Ehud's wife, spoke out about Israel's obligation to defend its citizens and her desire to receive a sign of life from her husband. Ehud's father shared the same sentiment.
I hope to get some public opinion and bring my case to your government and try via them build some pressure on the Hezbollah to get some signs of life from my son.
And on that issue, former PA Foreign Minister Nabil Shad said today that negotiations are moving forward for the release of Corporal Gilad Shalit, being held by Palestinian terrorists in Gaza. Shad said Israel would release 700 Palestinian prisoners in return for Gilad as part of a mutual ceasefire agreement. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, efforts continue to determine the condition of all 3 of the IDF hostages. In a special interview with Israel Television's Yaakov Achimeir, Paul Kneely, an international Red Cross representative in Israel, revealed for the first time that his organization is in indirect contact with the kidnappers.
We are in indirect contact with those holding all 3 soldiers. At this moment in time, it has been impossible for us to get direct access, mainly due to the intensification of military operations and the security concerns for those that are holding them. So what we are trying to do at this moment in time is to at least allow the soldiers to contact their families through what we call a Red Cross message, which is basically family news, which we would personally deliver from the soldiers to their families, and this we are still working on.
What do you know about them at the moment, Mr. Kneely?
We've been unable to independently verify either their location or their health status. However, the indirect channels that we have assured us that they are okay, and that at some time we may be allowed to have access. Nevertheless, this is a very sensitive situation, and we ourselves we insist to verify everything independently. It's extremely difficult for us to get access right now, and we put all our efforts into just maintaining the channels of communication as we have them today.
Did you succeed in establishing contact with Palestinian circles vis-a-vis Gilad Shalit?
Yes, we have an indirect, what I would call an indirect channel of communication. By that I mean we do not have direct contact with those holding Gilad Shalit, but we have, through various channels and contacts that we have through our office in Gaza, we have managed indirect channels of communication. And today we are trying very hard to deliver a Red Cross message which Gilhad's family have written, and which we are personally trying to deliver to those holding him in order that Gilad can have at least some contact and hopefully respond to this message. But it's a constant process of negotiation, and very important that we keep these channels of communication open at this stage.
So you have a written message or a letter from the Shalit family to Gilad, yes?
Yes, I personally visited all families last week, the Regevs, the Goldwassers and the Shalits in their homes, and I asked them to write this Red Cross message. As in such cases, there's no guarantees, but we have to try everything we can in order to make a contact. And what's very important for the families at this stage is to get some sort of a sign of life, that their sons are okay, and then we can hopefully move on to the next stage, which would be direct access for the International Red Cross.
مساء الخير. عمليا بدأت إسرائيل بتطبيق سياسة الأرض المحروقة بعد أن حرقت البشر وارتكبت أفظع المجازر.
Israel has begun to implement its scorched earth policy after the people have been burned, and Israel committed the most heinous massacres, the latest being the savage Qana massacre. The Israeli enemy government, which foiled all the mediation efforts and thwarted all efforts to resolve the crisis, decided to extend its aggression plans into its second phase by emptying southern Lebanese towns in preparation for expanding its land incursion from 6 to 7 kilometers inside Lebanese territories. However, there is a different reality on the ground. Every meter or twig of our lands has been transformed into a fire pit for the occupation soldiers as a result of the confrontations and heroic battles by the resistance men, who are fighting at various access points and fronts in Bin Jubail, Taibe, Hula, Kafakila, and Adesi. Also, the village of Ait al-Shab witnessed the most violent and most honorable land confrontations, inflicting heavy casualties among occupation forces. Here is the report.
بين قتيل وجريح. هذا التقرير.
بعد ساعات على المواجهات الضارية التي خاضها رجال المقاومة مع جنود الاحتلال في محور كفر كلا بوابة فاطمة، جرى صد محاولات التوغل البري الإسرائيلي باتجاه عدد من التلال المحيطة ببلدتي كفر كلا والعديسي.
Hours after fierce fighting between the resistance fighters and the occupation soldiers in the Kafr Qilya access point, otherwise known as Fatima Gate, the resistance blocked Israeli attempts to carry out land incursions in various hilltops surrounding Kafr Qilya and Adesi villages. The battles continued throughout the night. The occupation forces, which sustained heavy losses in the clashes, responded to the steadfastness of the resistance fighters by randomly bombing the villages of Kafr Qilya and Adesi with more than 100 tank shells. Enemy planes also carried out about 15 airstrikes targeting a number of hilltops and residential homes, especially in Kafr Qilya and the outskirts of the Fatima Gate, where there were very violent clashes. The occupation forces also bombed the surrounding villages in Deir Mimas and Taibe, as well as others. Lebanese resistance movement Amal paid tribute to the martyr and mujahid Ibrahim Ali, known as Fallah, who was martyred by the aggression and engaged in heroic fighting with the occupation forces at the Fatima access gate in Kafr Qilya. The martyr was born in Kafr Qilya in 1986. At the Ait al-Shab access point, violent confrontations took place between the resistance and the occupation soldiers. Various weapons were used by the resistance after a group of Israelis tried to advance towards the village, which came under very intense and violent bombings. In a statement, the resistance revealed that it was able to stop the Israeli incursion, forcing Israeli forces to retreat after they came under a defensive ambush near the Aita Sha'ab school. The resistance attacked them with the appropriate weapons, injuring and killing 15 Israelis. Many enemy tanks and machinery were also destroyed. In the Hawla access point, there were fierce confrontations. Resistance fighters stopped Israeli attempts to advance towards the village, forcing them to retreat. This came after they sustained a violent attack in Hawla and Maisa Jabal villages. An Israeli military source acknowledged that an Israeli soldier was wounded in the ongoing battles in the Taibe area. Amidst all this, the Islamic resistance paid tribute to the 3 martyrs who died in confrontations with the occupation forces.
3 شهداء سقطوا في المواجهات مع قوات الاحتلال هم حسين علي محمد كوراني، محمد حسين حيدر جعفر، ومحمد وفيق.
The head of the Palestinian National Council, Salim al-Zanoun, condemned the heinous Israeli and terrorist crime against the Lebanese town of Qana. The victims were women and children who sought refuge in one of Qana's shelters. They have fled their homes due to the ongoing Israeli air raids and artillery shelling. Al-Zanoun called on the international community, including government and parliamentary agencies and civic organizations, to take responsibility and mount pressure on Israel to stop the shelling and stop its disregard of international laws and treaties. In a show of solidarity with Palestinian prisoners and detainees in Israeli jails, prisoners' families held a sit-in near the headquarters of the International Red Cross in Gaza. Protesters held photos of the detainees and called on the international community to mount pressure on Israel to secure their immediate release. They also praised the steadfastness of the Palestinian and Lebanese people against the Israeli entity.
We hold sit-ins every Monday. We consider Monday of each week a holy day. In a show of solidarity with the detainees, we hold weekly sit-ins. I ask God to give strength to the detainees so that they continue on with their struggle and their steadfastness. I also ask God to protect and free all detainees and prisoners. I would like to send a message to the Secretary General for Hezbollah, Mr. Hassan Nasrallah. I pray to God to help Nasrallah win the war and defeat the enemy. God willing, he will be victorious.
I am the mother of Ahmad Shahada, a Palestinian detainee who spent 18 years of a 47-year prison term in the Sabah detention center. I am also the sister of Hatem Ismail, who is serving a 25-year sentence. Ismail has spent 12 years in jail. He served as a secretary for the late Yahya Ayash, a prominent Hamas leader who was assassinated by Israel. We held a sit-in near the headquarters of the International Red Cross. Prisoners' families came from various areas, including Beit Hanun and Rafah, and other parts of the Gaza Strip. In a show of solidarity with the detainees and prisoners, we come to the headquarters of the Red Cross on Mondays. My message to the detainees is to continue the struggle and steadfastness. God willing, they will be freed soon.
The Lebanese Palestinian Brotherhood Association held a wake for the martyrs of the Qana massacre. 60 people, mostly women and children, were killed in this massacre. Palestinians, including local residents, government officials, and representatives of the civic society organizations, visited the grief-stricken home and offered condolences. Abdul Qadir Faris, the head of the Lebanese Palestinian Brotherhood Association, said that he opened the grief house in a show of solidarity with the Lebanese people.
On this day, the Lebanese people announced a period of mourning for victims and martyrs of the Qana second massacre. This massacre was committed by the Zionist enemy in order to eradicate the struggle and the steadfastness of the Lebanese people. This Israeli attack was racially motivated and it targeted the Lebanese people and Lebanon's infrastructure. This terrorist attack was carried out by Israel and it was supported by the United States of America. The Lebanese Palestinian Brotherhood Association in Palestine and the Lebanese people share similar faith and cause. We pledge loyalty to our brothers in Lebanon. In a show of solidarity with the Lebanese people, we opened the symbolic grief home for the Qana martyrs. Mourners can come here and offer condolences for all martyrs in Lebanon and Palestine. They are the martyrs of the Arab nation who defended its honor in southern Lebanon.
Khalid al-Batsh, the spokesman of the Islamic Jihad, condemned the targeting of civilians and described the massacre as heinous.
The targeting of civilians is an old Zionist policy and ideology. Israel wants to inflict major losses among the Lebanese and the Palestinian people in order to mount pressure on the Lebanese resistance and government. Israel committed this crime using American-made missiles. Therefore, the U.S. is an accomplice to this crime. The United Nations and the Arab leaders who remained silent are also accomplices to this crime. We must change our position towards the international community and the United States. Our nation must take responsibility and defend the children of Lebanon. We should not remain silent in the face of this dangerous Zionist military escalation.
The features of the southern suburbs of Beirut have been completely changed, and now it looks like Stalingrad at the end of World War II, according to our colleague Osama Ibrahim.
أطلقت عليها تسميات عدة قلعة الصمود.
Many names have been given to the southern suburbs of Beirut: Castle of Resistance, the Misery Zone, the Sunny Suburbs, the Resistance Reservoirs, and many others. It comprises many residential buildings and crowded neighborhoods, as well as a stretch of villages and the Bekaa Valley, the home of a diverse group of people who were forced to flee due to the Israeli bombing. These people formed a reservoir of human resources that contributed to major development activity in the region, which was evident by the buildings that lined all its streets.
مشهد الضاحية اختلف اليوم. العدوان الإسرائيلي غير معالمها كليا بفعل أطنان الصواريخ التي ألقتها الطائرات من السماء أو أرسلتها قاذفات البوارج الإسرائيلية من عرض البحر.
Today, the southern suburbs have a very different image. The Israeli aggression has changed its features completely, with the tons of missiles that Israeli planes have dumped from the sky, or the ones that were launched by naval ships from the sea. Buildings no longer look like buildings, nor have institutions and commercial stores stayed the same. One is overwhelmed by shock and astonishment as he roams the streets of the suburbs. Yesterday the buildings were standing tall, people and cars were overcrowding it. But today destruction is everywhere and the rubble is in every neighborhood and street, testifying to the magnitude of the aggression. People are being very cautious as planes hover in the sky. Time stands still. Streets are no longer connected. Bridges are destroyed. Big craters were formed in the ground. Anyone who enters these streets feels as though he were entering for the first time. One can no longer distinguish the features, and one only sees the rubble of buildings. Buildings that were standing tall yesterday had been leveled to the ground. Institutions that were full of activity are a thing of the past. Not so long ago, this area was full of noise and movement, but now one only hears the echoes of one's own voice and the screaming journalists who rush to leave before yet another hateful Israeli air raid. Anyone who has had the opportunity to look at the streets and witness the massive destruction would quickly attest that this is not an easy matter. This suburb, which was known for its bustling activity, is now a historical site, perhaps reminding us of the forgotten city of Stalingrad, which confronted the Nazis during World War II.
إلى مدينة ستالينغراد التي انتصرت على النازية، وربما لمدينة لم تعد في البال.
Ignoring growing calls for a ceasefire, Israel blasted eastern and southern Lebanon from the air Tuesday and prepared to advance deeper into Lebanese territory.
Israel thrust into southern Lebanon and pounded towns and villages, meeting fierce resistance from Hezbollah members who reportedly killed 3 Zionists. Israeli shells rained down on the border area around the Lebanese village of Aita al-Shab, where Hezbollah said it had destroyed 2 tanks in battles with Israeli troops. 3 Israeli Zionists died in those clashes and dozens more were injured. Hezbollah said it had inflicted 20 casualties in house-to-house battles at Aita al-Shab and foiled the advance of the Zionists in the region. Hezbollah also fired rockets into Qaryat Shammon and Al-Jalil Ulia in northern occupied Palestine. Elsewhere in Lebanon, Israeli warplanes bombed areas along the Litani River and Bekaa Valley, as well as eastern villages in Sor. The Zionists did not even spare the linking roads to Syria.
Favors dialogue and seeks its legitimate rights in the framework of international regulations. The president made the remark Tuesday in an address to a gathering of residents in Bojnout, the capital city of North Khorasan province, where he reacted to the UN Security Council resolution on Iran and said the Iranian nation will not renounce its legitimate right to access civilian nuclear know-how. President Ahmedinejad also made it clear that those opted to the language of force in dealing with Iran should be warned that the Iranian nation will never bow to threats.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.